Guys, I've been reading in the Bible and I found something that really made me disturbed. And I started thinking about the fact that the Bible was getting its geography all wrong. And I'm like, no wonder the churches like that behind me are falling into disrepair. It becomes unbelievable if the Bible can't quite get the geographical details right. Is Jesus coming? Is he going? Where is he going? Do they know where the towns are? Are they making up stuff? Oh, because I read this from Luke. As Jesus approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard the crowd going by, he asked what was happening. They told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. He called out to them, Son of David, have mercy upon me. And then in Mark, then they came to Jericho as Jesus and his disciples, together with a loud crowd, were leaving the city. A blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy upon me. So you guys see what I'm saying? In the first one, Jesus is coming into the city. In the second one, in Mark, he's going out of the city. Is he coming? Is he going? I don't know. I don't think they know. They're just making up stuff. All right, I'm done. Whole Christian thing, I'm out. The archaeological evidence for biblical reliability with Jesus. So obviously the argument that I was using previously was not a particularly strong argument. The biblical authors, firstly, weren't particularly concerned about whether or not they were coming or going in or out of a city. It does not undermine the entire text when you have minor error like this, firstly. And secondly, oftentimes cities were in the ancient world sort of spread out, where you kind of have breaks in between little sections of it. And so you could say you're going in or you're going out. It doesn't really matter it doesn't matter particularly if you say you're going in or out. You're probably in the middle, going from one section to another. It doesn't really matter. And so when you hear criticisms like this, you know that those criticisms are pretty silly. But I do like to listen to Beethoven, so I thought the doom and gloom would be good for us. So here's the question. Should we take the gospel account seriously if the authors didn't bother to get the geographic and historic details right? Well, the answer would be no, but we also have to take the text on its own terms. In other words, we have to take the literature and the writing style of the times into account as well. Now, before we go any further, we should note that the correctness of these details will not prove that the Gospels are right, obviously. If I say one thing correct, or if I say, the majority of the details of the things that I say are correct, it doesn't mean that everything that I say is necessarily correct. However, consistency does tend to promote reliability and credibility. And so that's what we're looking for here. Does the biblical text continually relay correct details? And I think we'll find that the answers, when we have evidence, historical and archaeological, is that yes, the biblical texts are reliable. So here's a text from John, where Jesus is going to heal an invalid man by the pool of Bethesda. And for many years, there was a critique about this particular text in John's writing because the pool of Bethesda didn't exist. We say, well, clearly that, they can't get the geographic details right. The author places much of the Gospel of John in places in actual geographic locations, and if you can't find these locations, then what good are they? Well, it turns out excavations here within the last 50 years, guess what we found? The Pool of Bethsaida. So there you go. Additionally, there's another section in John's Gospel, John 9:7. We have another pool that is mentioned. Again, it took a while for these pools to be found. The Pool of Siloam, but sure enough, oh, there it is. We still find it. If we lower the streets back to the place where they were in Jesus's day, we can find that these places talked about in the Gospel of John are there. Oh, what about Jacob's Well? Turns out Jacob's Well is also there. Oh, look at that. We even have an Orthodox church over the top of Jacob's Well, which we read about in John chapter 4. In John chapter 19, we read about the Jaffa Gate. Well, turns out we know where the Jaffa Gate is. There it is. And also the stone pavement also is still there. So there you go. We have a lot of corroborating historical details. There are difficulties, however, especially in Luke's gospel. In it, we have a pretty remarkable census that takes place. And it came in those days. There went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that the whole world should be taxed. And this taxing was when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And everyone went up to their own city to be taxed. And Joseph also went up with Mary, his espoused wife, who was great with child, to be taxed. This census in Luke chapter 2 has always caused, since the 1800s, liberal scholarship, something to point to, which suggests that the gospel writers are making up stories in order to fulfill Old Testament prophecies. After all, who really has to go back to their hometown in order to fulfill some sort of duty for the census? But we actually have, in the ancient world, one other example of exactly this. I'm going to read it for you. This dates to 104 AD. Gaius Vibius Maximus, prefect of Egypt, says, "Seeing that the time has come for the house-to-house census, it is necessary to compel all those who, for any cause whatsoever, are residing out of their provinces to return to their own homes, that they may both carry out the regular order of the census and may also attend diligently to the cultivation of their allotments." So why would Jesus, why would his parents have to go back to Bethlehem in more of a way than just simply fulfilling the prophecy from Zechariah, out of you, O little town of Bethlehem, basically comes a ruler? Well, it could be that Joseph, by the nature of his occupation, was one that moved around to some extent, and Nazareth may have been a place where they lived on something of a temporary basis, at least initially. There was the building going on next door in a fairly large city. It's very likely that Joseph was employed there. And so going back to Bethlehem on some level would make quite a bit of sense. And so once again, here we have not proof, but we have a plausibility to this particular narrative. The slaughter at Bethlehem is a difficult one. This is in St. Matthew's Gospel. And in it, we hear that after the wise men leave the newborn child and his mother, or maybe he was a year old young child, and go back to the east, Matthew reports that Joseph is warned in a dream to flee to Egypt, and so he does. And then Herod, being very angry that this newborn king could usurp his power potentially, has the young children around Bethlehem, the young male children, killed up to about 2 years old. And so we would assume that Jesus is somewhere in that age, somewhere between birth and 2. And yet we have absolutely no record of this slaughter at Bethlehem ever having taken place, other than in Matthew's Gospel. And so this has led a lot of skeptical historians to doubt and to say, no, this isn't possible. This sort of slaughter would be recorded elsewhere. Herod would be known as a horrific king, and there you have it. But you have to keep in mind that Bethlehem was and always has been a fairly small village. And if you look at the number of small male children between the ages of birth and 2, the number of children that would have been killed in the slaughter was actually probably quite small. Probably small enough to go without a whole lot of notice from the larger Israel region. And so in the image here, we have this very old drawing here of the women crying and in sorrow. But the number of babies that they show there, it's probably about the number that it was. A pretty small number. And it's actually quite possible that this would have escaped being recorded permanently in history. All right, guys, that concludes our lecture on the archaeological support for the gospel narratives. Okay, we will see you on the other side of the corona, hopefully in person.